I've been truly blessed with some amazing opportunities. An opportunity to travel. By the time I turned 40, I'd been to 100 countries. And for me, my point of departure is being rich is having money. Being wealthy is having time. And I've always aspired at being wealthy rather than being rich. Fortunately, because you grew up in the township, all the houses look the same, all four-roomed houses. The few that had some semblance of money would then have a stoop and big windows and maybe the gates that close by themselves, not because they have electricity, but because they've got a spring attached to them. You open it and then it yanks it back. So I never even knew that I was poor until I was much older by the current standards. My grandmother had a most amazing impression on me. And she's always taught us that we will be successful if the first third of our life can be devoted to learning, so that the middle third can be devoted to earning, so that the last third can then be devoted to sharing. So I'm at that stage where the little that I've made, I'm always looking for an opportunity to share it with others, especially the young ones that are wanting to go to school, want their education to be financed. They're looking for smartphones, tablets as tools of trades, not just to be on WhatsApp. So when I went to Wits, 1981, to do medicine, MBBCH, so I get confronted by this, I suppose, a standard question. Why do you want to become a doctor? So instead of giving platitudes, motherhood statements, and apple pie, pretending to want to save the world and boil the ocean, I just said, look, my father passed away when I was 17. I'm only left with my mother, to the then dean, Professor Philip Tobias, that all I want to do is to earn enough money to be able to look after my mother. And the way I phrased it was, I want to make the most amount of money in the shortest period of time. He looked at me with absolute incredulity and said, we listened to some sob stories. You know what? You are probably the first one who's been totally and absolutely honest with me. You are in. That's why I was admitted to Wits MBBCH first year, 1981, with all the ambitions to become a doctor. But very soon after passing my fourth year, I think it dawned on me that I think I can have much more impact as a manager, rather than spend the rest of my life looking down people's throats for an area that big to figure out whether it's laryngitis, pharyngitis, or tonsillitis. But by appealing, by being vulnerable, by reaching out to 10 people that you can ultimately be their supervisor, I thought it's much more impactful, because real wealth is how you affect each individual at a personal level, one at a time. That's my take on wealth versus just pure richness. I think all of us are influenced by anything and everything around us. I'm a product of all the inputs and influences that have ever come across, that have touched me in a very meaningful way. But the one that I remember most profoundly is Oprah Winfrey, when she says, if you don't know who you are, then money will define you. I think it's good to be at peace with yourself, to be driven by a greater purpose of meaning, and indeed a profound sense of consciousness and intentionality. Because unless you do that, you'll be like a reed in the middle of the river. When the water takes you this way, you ebb this way. When it takes you that way, you go that way. But for a human being that is truly and absolutely anchored, that has their true north, that understands that this thing called the lighthouse is not fair weather, it's anchored and it's fixed. It is based on values and principles, not how you woke up on that particular morning. Therefore, my absolute appreciation of wealth is rooted in that, trying to improve the quality of lives of the majority of people, especially those that are less fortunate than ourselves. So one thing that always intrigues me is that, isn't it amazing that the people who have very little are the ones that are willing to share? And yet the people who are billionaires many times over, who have a car for every day of the week, are the ones that need to be plodded and prodded to be able to share. I grew up in the township where we shared almost anything and everything. If you didn't have sugar, you went next door. If you didn't have salt, that's what you did. And the old ladies will say, I see that today you're walking with a little bit of a limp. What's wrong? I say, no, I've got a little bit of pain on my knees. And say, let me share with you what helped me 3 months ago when I suffered a similar pain. So they share hypertensive medicine, arthritic medicine, because to them, that's how they find meaning and purpose. Today, the millennials are teaching us that we need to go back to those days where we are defined by a life of purpose and meaning. Because that's what they're looking for when they're looking for a job. They're not asking you how much money you're going to pay them. They're saying, tell me who you are and what you stand for. And I'll see whether I want to be part of this journey. And that's what I find really touching in a very profound way. My perception about wealth changed many times as you grow and you get different perspectives and you really focus on things that genuinely matter. In business, we think that the business is bricks and mortar or the products and services that we provide until you discover that actually the genuine business is the people. Therefore, if people are your greatest investment, you need to tell them and treat them as such. If people are your greatest wealth, then you need to put people before profits. And they need to know that here they genuinely matter, that they feel needed and wanted, that they are free to speak their mind, that you didn't hire them just for their pair of hands, but for their ability to think and reflect. Because we always start with who and then the what. Because if you can start with the right people, they will help you to figure out the what. Leadership for me, it's about talking straight. It's about extending trust. It's about piloting, highlighting, and celebrating others. It's about being genuinely obsessed with the development of others. And I contrast that with management, where management, it's about ensuring that you get things done through other people, that it is, if it is to be, then it is up to you. So for me, the real wealth, it's the many people that are walking around wanting to help us, coming with good intention, absolutely wholesome. And then you realize as a boss that a majority of our people are not reaching their potential, not even their fullest potential. Therefore, our job is to how do we palette, highlight, and celebrate them in a manner that exposes them for them to be comfortable to really reach their fullest potential. Because at the end of the day, it's how you engage, interact, and interface with other human beings that determines your long-term impact. Because surely in Africa, this notion of resilience, it's much more than the food, energy, water nexus. It's how you form deep connections, almost at a spiritual level, where you look at somebody without even saying anything, and they know that you have their back. There is definitely a link between wealth and corporate social investment rather than just responsibility, because there must be a return on investment. And the way I think about it, especially as informed by the title of my book, Lift As You Rise, this is an African adage. It simply says, at an individual level, you don't have to wait until you have sufficiently risen. You have the correct title, the C-suite, before you extend a hand and you lift another human being. It says take 2 steps, because there is no exercise that is greater for the heart than extending a hand down and just lifting another human being. And it says, this is what we learned from our teachers in the 70s when they were protesting against the introduction of Bantu education, but they just didn't abandon us because they genuinely cared about the education of an African child. That's why they coined the phrase, each one teach one. That is wealth at its most fundamental level. And it says if you're a company, the best amongst us lead with the heart of a servant. Therefore, servant leadership is not a leader with many servants. But business needs to be much more purposeful, conscious, and strategic in the way it uses its resources because it has a disproportionate voice and indeed disproportionate resources. You see, in the 21st century, business cannot continue to be an island of prosperity in a sea of poverty. We need to bring to effect this notion that says we need to continue to do well by doing good. Because it's when we lift the whole of society that we are not involved in job creation, but in creating the markets of the future. Because there's a problem when your own employees cannot afford the goods and services that you provide. Therefore, it behooves all of us to say, what then is my responsibility as a company in terms of corporate social responsibility? First and foremost, it says, your role as a business to survive, because if you can survive, you can make money until it comes out of your ears. Secondly, is to bring about into effect this notion of shared value. One of the key challenges confronting boards today is to ensure that corporate decision-making is consistent not only with the whims of the shareholders, but the broader stakeholder community. How you think about the society in which you are located. How do you think about the community that you drive through every morning as you go to work, every afternoon as you knock off? Had we thought about that conscientiously, Marikana would not have happened. Because how do we justify that our fellow colleagues are living in informal settlements? They don't even have a concrete structure with a roof over their heads. And yet we're not unleashing the resources that the company has to improve their quality of life. That to me is corporate social responsibility, that charity like clarity begins at home. Before you help the people of Davidton, can you help the ones that are living with you, that you look at every day and you know that their want is bigger than their month end at the end of the 25th of every month? I think the turning point as I was growing up is the realization that money is not everything. In fact, that money does not give you happiness, but you get happiness from inner contentment. And how do you get inner contentment? When you are prepared to share the little that you have. Because that's how you make yourself useful. That's how you find meaning and purpose. Just like the moon gives the sun its purpose. We wake up every day knowing that irrespective of the difficulties that we're confronted with, the sun is still going to shine. Therefore, especially in companies, because today humanity has lost trust in companies that are not complying with good corporate citizenship. They've lost faith in companies that have aided and abetted state capture in the South African context. They've lost faith in companies that are found to be doing things that they should not be doing, inflating their assets, worrying only about the bonuses of their executives, not about the lowest of the low, the poorest of the poor, those that wake up often at 4 in the morning without seeing their children, coming back at 7 o'clock in the evening when their children are already asleep. What is it that we can do to ensure that we help them to be able to bring up future leaders that are balanced, that are wholesome, because they've seen that you can sit around the table and share about how your day has been like. Lastly, for me, I think this notion of corporate social investment, it's a realization that it's about constantly having a conversation with communities to say, how can we help you? Because if we help them, we are indeed helping ourselves, because we're creating economic activity that will ensure greater prosperity. For me, I think corporate South Africa has never been called upon to do much more than what they are required to do today. When politicians are losing trust of the people. And why does trust matter so much? Because it's the only glue that holds us with our own people, that keeps us in check, that the things that we are doing indeed are benefiting humanity. Because when we lose that, we live in our own ivory towers and we'll start believing our own magic. And we forget that the genuine purpose is to ensure that all of us reach our own nirvana collectively, not just individually, but severally. What I find challenging today is, why is it so difficult for all of us to use our collective thought processes, our collective wealth, not just riches, to ensure that we take the bottom half out of their self-perpetuating vicious cycle of abject poverty and we bring them into the middle class. Because if we can do that, then all of us will sleep better at night. My grandmother used to say, when your neighbor is hungry, you are the one that can sleep at night. Therefore, the onus is on those that have, because to those that much is given, much more is expected. I'm a beneficiary of patriarchy. Therefore, my job is to kick down the corporate doors to bring about this notion of gender equality and gender pay parity. It cannot be that in the 21st century, 26 years into democracy, we pay women 75% of what we pay men for work of equal value. And yet we know that when we put a smartphone in the hands of women, not only does the health and nutrition and education of their own children improve, but of their entire society and community from which they come. Lastly, our constitution is very loud on this. It guarantees 3 freedoms. Of course, the freedom of association, the freedom of speech, but most importantly, it guarantees the freedom from hunger. That's when we can attain social justice. That's when we can give effect to the South Africa of Rolihlahla, Nelson Mandela. That's when we can see social cohesion in our own lifetime. That's when we can genuinely speak about nation building. One people, one national anthem, one national flag, and one fate and one wealth. So is it important to continue to accumulate riches for its own sake? And the answer is no. When you live a life of purpose, when you see through your own life, you being accepted and perceived as a role model. When you wake up every day and say, what am I going to do today to improve the quality of lives of those that are less fortunate than me, then you are living a life of wealth, of richness, of purpose and meaning. A life that gives you more satisfaction than just the bank balance. It is not useful to be the only one that stands out like a sore thumb in your own community. It's not useful for you to have the biggest house in the community when all others look up to you with absolute envy, when they could say, if you can do it, especially knowing your background, then it means it is possible for me. That to me is where we can really touch and connect in a very meaningful way, when we make it possible for others to not give up, because leaders are dealers in hope. As Africans, we need to know when is enough enough. Because honestly, we can only drive one car at a time. But it's not sustainable that there are many young people who have to go and do first year and pass well and then go and be petrol attendants for another year just to accumulate the second year's fees. And they do that. And that is the life of the majority of our young people. So what could be my advice to these young, cleverer, hardworking, much more educated young people that are supposed to give this South Africa a step change? My advice is no people can be helped by or benefit from institutions that are not a direct result of their own character. The challenge is, how do we build our own monuments? When we have 740 state-owned enterprises and state-owned companies, why don't we have a much more longer-term view and orientation that says, if we take a chance on African females and black people in general and give them the responsibility with a final accountability to be CEOs and MDs of these 740, the next time Kenya Airways is looking for a CEO of their own airlines, they should be looking south at this almost 80-year-old award-winning South African Airways. But the reality today is that we inherited a truly amazing infrastructure. And we are not proud to say we have added, we have put more bricks, and therefore our children are not going to disown us. As I conclude, it is said that our economy is on its knees. that black graduates are roaming the streets hopelessly, that inequality is actually rising and racism is growing, that public education is continuing to fail the poor people that needs the most, that public health continue to fail the poor and the most vulnerable, that we have not succeeded in growing our own timber, that crucial infrastructure is lying in decay, and yet we are blessed with the most amazing wealth of collective thought processes with our own hands to be able to do stuff. Because state capture thrived on the basis that we have to get rid of the good people who know what they're doing, to replace them with people who don't know, rapidly promoted. Their only allegiance is to enabling state capture, that it is our turn to eat. If we are not very purposeful, our children are going to say, but what contribution did you make in the 26 years that you had to be free? How did you shape it in your own image, rather than just taking the riches to stay in your own bank account when you could have improved the quality of lives of the majority of our people, like Rwanda, like Singapore, like China adds the entire population of South Africa, almost 60 million people into the middle class a year every year. Thank you.